So what I want to explore in this video are some of the make or break principles and patterns that underlie either a sustainable relationship or an unsustainable relationship. Now, as a little bit of context, I've done a whole series of videos about trauma and PTSD. If you're interested in that topic, I go into it in great depth because it's a big part of my life at understandtrauma.com. It's all just a love project to spread awareness and depth and complexity. But roughly, I'd say roughly 30% of the population is suffering from some degree, and it's on a gray scale, it's not black or white, to some degree with post-traumatic stress syndrome as a result of childhood and adult traumas that turned on our biology into a fight-flight mechanism, and then not diffusing that at a biological level so that our brain in that area goes back to baseline. And I want you to kind of look at the landscape of human relationships and realize that without trauma, which produces intense and reactive fear, which in turn can be expressed as anger, fight, flight, etc., and without the underlying biology of that sending our brain messages that we are in danger and that we're in pain and we're in danger of pain and we're in danger of our lives, without that system, human relationships naturally take place in the upper part of the brain and the heart. Now, what that means is that fundamentally we are empathic, kind, curious, interested, generous, warm beings. And the only thing and the only reason that we're not is that we're not operating with the upper part of our brain and the heart. And the only thing that interrupts that natural operation is trauma. It can show up as scarcity, terror, I'm not going to get enough. This produces selfishness and pushiness and focus. Well, that's a survival part of the brain. And there's no getting around the fact that if you don't know where your next paycheck is coming from, or that we're basically in a scarcity mentality from scarcity in the reality, we're going to be coming from the reptilian brain. And the basic point that I'm making is that if your relationship can take place up in this part of the brain, and you're relatively compatible, meaning you find some attraction in one another, and you're interested in co-creating something beautiful, it's gonna work if the relationship is happening up in this part of the brain. It's not going to work to the degree that it happens down in the reptilian brain. Now, trauma, because we are a social and a bonding species, trauma happens when love is lost, when relationships separate, as well as when a bus nearly runs us over. So if we're rejected by a community, we will experience trauma. If we are rejected by our most important partner, we will experience trauma. And this is really important to understand. I had a whole wave of grief come up because both happened in the last year. And because our brain understands that for millions of years, we have not been able to survive as individuals, but only as a tribe, and in our ancient ancestry, only in a pack or a family of monkeys. We experience trauma. When this doesn't get resolved, it moves into the terrain of predisposed to be reactive and re-traumatized, where we re-experience the trauma. And the way this happens is that during a trauma, the part of the brain that is connected with time will shut down, and sometimes the part of the brain connected with language will shut down. And in that place, the trauma becomes timeless and therefore eternal. In its painful place and eternal place, a variety of things can trigger it and re-experience the emotion. Now, the brain processes this emotion and this threat of either isolation or rejection from important relationships as a life and death situation, which it was millions of years ago. There weren't, our brain is not caught up to the fact that if 20 people reject us over here, we can just walk over here and there's a good chance that 20 people will accept and embrace us for the same reasons that these other 20 people rejected us. And so our brain is not caught up with that. So rejection and humiliation, shame, which are all connected. If you're shamed, you're rejected. If you're humiliated, you're put on the outside. Humiliation is not sharing a little bit of fun. It's putting someone as an object outside of oneself or outside of the family or the bond, and then making a sport of their suffering. So you're not a part of me. You don't belong. I don't care about you. And I'm going to laugh and make you feel small. And it has nothing to do with me. This is humiliation. And it's putting someone on the outside. Our brain will process that as trauma. If it doesn't get resolved and released, then just the hint that we might be going to be humiliated, or a joke that was not intended to put us on the outside, but that reminded us of that, can bring us right back into our reptilian brain. So here's the thing. Relationships cannot survive in the reptilian brain because the programs of survival that come from the reptilian brain, effective as they are at survival, so manipulation, attack, running and abandoning, dishonesty, panic, self-absorption, which is a healthy thing to be. Like if your life is on the line and you're not self-absorbed, you're going to die. Self-absorption is a survival mechanism. Self-absorbed people are people at some level that have that at some level have not gotten that they're safe, that they're going to survive. And it's, it's all about them, because it's really all about, can I survive? Can I survive? And it's all inward. And secure, mature, and healthy people, i.e. people out of the trap where they're caught in the reptilian brain and they're up in here, it's all about the other person. I know I'm okay. I know I'm safe. The world is basically a friendly place, and I'm curious about you. And I want to hear about you. I want to listen. I want to know this. And I'm fascinated. I'm lost in the beauty of you. And this is, of course, normal. By normal, I don't mean average, but I mean the way that we're supposed to function when we're not in survival. Now, our culture is rife with trauma. Relationships split up and are brittle all the time. Families are torn apart. They often do not get rebuilt at the level of bonding and loyalty that would allow someone on the instinctual level to feel like, I have a safe tribe. I belong. My needs for belonging are met. I am part of a safe tribe that would die trying to protect me. There's not that sense in most relationships. It's more when there's a commercial break, when it's convenient, when this person isn't drunk, they'll come over and hang around as long as it's fun. If anything uncomfortable or that might actually trigger trauma or re-trigger some of their old issues to come up, they're out of there. That's not a relationship that can replace that deep need for bonding. And so at a very basic level, we can look at a relationship and we can say, I'm going to be successful with you to the degree that we are both successful at creating a reality that does not trigger survival needs and survival trauma, and a reality that does not re-trigger and trigger us into the repressed and undealt with old traumas. Now, most of the population has unresolved old traumas to some degree. That being a given, the question becomes, how do we respond? Do we, for example, educate our partners on, this is a trauma trigger point 8 out of 10. This is a trauma point 10 out of 10. This is a trauma point 3 out of 10. I can take 2 or 3 of these hits before I leave. I can take a couple of these hits before I don't trust you. I can take a couple of these hits and, or we've got one shot at this. For example, I will not tolerate a lie. And it's that simple. So given that a lot of these things are traumas that we as a culture and often as individuals do not know how to unravel out of the biology. It's not a mental emotional thing, it's a biological thing where terror, shame, and life and death instincts are stored in the body around some of our past events and in our partner's body. And it just takes the right button of 136 and there's an explosion. They go right down into the reptilian brain and start to do damage to the love, to the trust, to the flow from that place. Now, it's up to both people in a relationship to co-create, to first understand those trigger points, 2, avoid them, and 3, rapidly repair them, and 4, develop a variety of protocols and strategies for navigating around them, and rebuilding capital. Because that's the other thing, is ultimately another way of looking at the baseline of relationship is you've got to have more value than pain. So, and what I mean by pain is cost, time, money, effort, expense, hassle, pain, fear. So everyone in relationship that goes anywhere is going to experience all of that: money, pain, hassle, time, fear, anger, irritation, discomfort, fear of the unknown. They're going to have, the relationship's going to have a price tag. And that price is going to generate a certain level of value. Now, if that value is, up at $10,000 and the price is down at $200, it's a pretty sustainable relationship. But here again, trauma plays a role. Going through life and death trauma in which our brain and our emotions react as if we are dying or going to die, which is how the brain processes trauma, is so miserable, is so desperate, and we are so determined not to be needy, which we are in trauma, not to be dependent. We're so desperate to avoid that state as a culture that typically if a casual relationship triggers trauma, we do not as a culture have the skill, patience, and will to repair the trauma and rebuild the relationship. So typically, the relationship is shot. In more meaningful relationships where we're married or committed, if a trauma is triggered, a deep abandonment, a betrayal, we have the container of commitment and marriage and relationship that may be strong enough to hold those feelings in some sense of safety or not. Depends a lot on the skill of the person. And unfortunately, if there isn't the skill and the sensitivity to prevent and learn about and prepare for a trauma, there often isn't the skill to repair and heal the trauma that is created. It's a little bit of like Einstein saying the mindset that creates this isn't the mindset that can heal it. So there's some of that going on. But the really important thing to understand is that once trauma is stored in the body, which it is for a majority of people to some degree in an unresolved state, a certain trigger that in itself is minor will trigger a major withdrawal in our partner, because it's asking them to feel their worst nightmarish pain in order to, which then becomes associated with us. We're asking them to feel it, associate it with us, and still stay in relationship with us. And the value has to be extraordinarily high for most people to be able and willing to do that. Able is an important part as well. They may not be able to tolerate the fear, the pain, the shame, etc. This is the real reason that most relationships end. Unacknowledged trauma, which is simply a state in which we were separated from a core group family member, or in which we experienced a sensation of overwhelming force or helplessness or potential life and death situation, in which the chemicals in the body were produced for fight, flight, or freezing. But because of the social programming, this is the biological program, because the social programming is on top, we did none of those. And we didn't do it effectively, and we didn't get the chemicals out of our body system. We didn't get the message back to the survival brain that it's now over and we're now safe again. And so it's left in a high alert state, and the reality clears up and we become safe again, literally, but the survival brain doesn't have the message and hasn't got the repair, and it's in a state of agitation. In that state, it's very easy to catalyze it back up to full-fledged survival feelings, even when the new situation does not seem to fully threaten our existence. So this is the crisis of trauma, and when it's in this chronic state, PTSD. And this is there's two bottom lines that we've discussed. One, a relationship will succeed if there's some attraction and mutuality of interest, which there is in a majority of people, some degree of attraction and mutuality of interest. If it can stay in the upper part of the human healthy brain and not in the reptilian brain of fight, flight, survival, and regardless of that exact ratio, if it generates more value than pain, which goes back to the trauma piece, because the single most painful thing that we can experience is a re-triggered of our core wounds and our trauma around that. And here's the thing. Almost every loving, deeply committed relationship will touch on and re-trigger our core trauma if it is there in an unresolved state. Why? Because it needs to be resolved in order for healing and deep love and deeper connection to blossom. It needs to be healed. It's got to come out of its unresolved state. However, if that happens unconsciously and reactively, it's a replaying of the wound, the relationship is lost, and there's just enormous suffering and a new trauma. If it's handled constructively, a lot of consciousness is brought to the wound, a lot of love is brought to the terrain, a lot of preparation and understanding. And as a couple, usually, in order to fully express oneself, one or both people will touch on some of the trigger points of the wound. But if that can be gone through consciously and relived consciously, where that wound is weeped and grieved and held and understood and honored and released, and now both people are free. It's an entirely different reality. You can transcend the wound and go on to become fully realized people, which we are not as long as an unresolved trauma is there in place. As long as it's in place, there's going to be about 30% of our energy protecting it, protecting us from reactivating it. I won't get too close to someone because they might touch this button, and so I'm blocking that person. I'll get close to this person because they're so casual and unintimate, they have no chance of pressing the button, but I won't get close to this real person. I'm going to leave this real relationship because it's getting too deep. There's all this protection which blocks our full self-expression. There's two books that I want to mention. One is The Body Keeps the Score. The other is that's by Bessel van der Kolk. The other is Healing Trauma by Stephen Levine. And there's a couple of even side books that kind of tie in. One is When the Body Says No. I forget the author. The other is Alice Miller's The Body Never Lies. It's a rich tapestry of new insight and healing preparation, etc. And blessings on your journey to heal and to love the wound and trauma.